Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tammy Stacklehouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stacklehouse, and this is episode 83. As you may have heard by now, I have written an updated version of my first book, Take Back Your Life. This new edition is going to come out a little bit later this week, and as a celebration of that, I have invited a friend to interview me for a change. We are going to be talking about what's new in this edition and what's changed. My friend also asked some fantastic questions that I think you are going to love. Just so that you know who's asking the questions in this interview, this is my friend, Ramses Rodriguez. He helps individuals suffering from panic and anxiety with science-based and holistic modalities. Ramses holds a Master of Science degree in developmental genetics and combines science theory and alternative therapies to help people remain panic-free while keeping the career of their dreams. Now, I met Ramses through my publisher, where he coaches authors through all the anxiety that comes with writing a book. He's written a couple of books himself, one on anxiety and panic attacks, which we will talk about in the next episode, and one on writer's block. I hope that you enjoy my interview with Ramses. And in the meantime, of course, remember, any information shared on this podcast should not be considered medical advice, nor should it be intended to replace consulting with a qualified physician or other healthcare provider. Stay tuned at the end, and I'll tell you how you can get an early copy of my new book.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to be finally on this podcast.
I know, it's so much fun to have you on here. I know you've been listening, and so this is perfect.
Avid listener, and I'm honored that I'm actually interviewing you and talking about some amazing new things with your new book. Oh my God. So let's just dive right in, because I am a fan, of course, and I know everyone listens. I see how you have an amazing posse of people who listen, and I think it's such a beautiful thing. So tell me a little bit about the book, Take Back Your Life. I know it happens to be a second edition, so let's just kind of go into it. What could they expect about this new book?
Absolutely. Love to talk about that. So when I first wrote the book back in 2015, it was the first book I ever wrote. And because of that, there were a few things that just, for overwhelm's sake, for newbies' sake, that I just didn't include. And the biggest part of that is a chapter on brain fog. So fibromyalgia has four main symptoms. The pain, everybody usually knows about, fatigue, poor sleep, and brain fog. And I left out brain fog in the first edition because, again, first book, newbie time, but also because at that time, I didn't have a ton of really good tools for how to help people with that. So that is probably the number one thing that people will see in the new book is there is a chapter on brain fog with all the things that I've learned in the last 7 years about how to work with that. And then, of course, little things like there's new studies that have come out, there's new science, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, let's kind of get into a little bit about brain fog. The brain fog, at least as far as I know in terms of anxiety, which is my world, there are a lot of things that brain fog get in the way of. And it sounds very descriptive, but I think there are very specific applications where brain fog gets in the way, like basic things like doing your work or reading. Is it similar, like the way that I'm imagining it? Or
Yes, there's a huge piece of that. And I'm so glad you're coming back for the next episode, because one of the things I talk about in my book is amygdala hijack, which is the whole anxiety world where that panic takes over your brain and your logical function doesn't happen, right?
goes out the window. Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that really happens with fibromyalgia, and I don't know if this is the same with anxiety, but because of our poor sleep, there's things that don't happen in the brain the way that it should at night when you're sleeping. Fatigue, for instance, your brain uses a whole lot of your energy. You don't think about it, but it does. And so if you're low on gas, so to speak, right, like your brain just isn't going to function as well. And there's a few other things as well. It's a really challenging symptom for so many people. One of the stories I tell in the book is about how when I was really at my worst, I missed paying some really important bills, and my husband had to take over doing the finances, which is like our whole marriage. We've been married 15 years, and I was always the person doing it, right? But for a little while, he had to, just because I couldn't remember, wasn't doing things right.
Yeah, it seems like it really takes over in a big way. So, do you have a little teaser of how to? Because right now I'm so on the edge of my seat. Like, how do we get rid of this brain fog? And of course, it includes all the other elements. I'm sure they're interconnected, but kind of, what do we got here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, first of all, for you and everyone listening, if you want to go to takebackyourlifebook.com, even though the book's not officially out yet, I've updated that page to give the second edition so you can grab a free copy early if you do that. In the chapter on brain fog, some of the things that I talk a lot about are neurotransmitters, the amino acids that come in our protein and, of course, make up all of our neurotransmitters. And with fibromyalgia, there's some pretty significant ones. Serotonin is often low, norepinephrine is often low, GABA is low. So, learning how to tweak those. And 2 of the 3 FDA approved fibromeds address these neurotransmitters. So, and having natural ways to do that. And then a ton of tips and tricks, and just probably a lot of the stuff you use with your clients with anxiety, just ways that you structure your life so that you're not as reliant on having to remember things, right? Like putting the keys in the same place every time, building habits and routines.
Yep. I've called this before casually like a launch pad, where things are always in a certain kind of hub so that there's no anxiety. I love that you mentioned sleep a little bit. It's one of the things that definitely affects anxiety, where we address those things, at least the way I talk about it, is the night before. So what kinds of things affect that? And I know you talk about it a lot on your podcast, but related to this whole brain fog update, is there any connections we can make about how sleep affects the brain fog?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, a big piece is that energy connection, right? If you're not getting good sleep, then your energy level is low and you just don't have the energy to think. So that's a big piece. But there's some really cool things that happen in your brain at night. One of the things that happens is your brain actually clears out toxins. So makes space in your brain, your cerebral spinal fluid flushes through there and flushes out toxins. If you don't get good sleep, that doesn't happen. And they've linked some of those toxins to things like Alzheimer's and dementia and stuff like that. So just for general health, but also we want that brain to be as happy as possible. Another big thing that happens during sleep, and it requires norepinephrine to do this, I talk about this in the book, is making your memories, transforming them into long-term memory. So moving them from your current memories to long-term storage. And that happens at night. So a lot of us have a really hard time like remembering things. This is probably one of the things that's not happening quite the way that it should, either not having enough norepinephrine for that to happen or not getting enough good sleep so that happens.
Yeah. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. In my circles, that process of remembering things long-term, going from short-term memory to long-term memory, called long-term potentiation. It's kind of the way the neurons talk. And it seems like you're giving practical ways for that to happen, which is kind of cool because I don't know about you, but sometimes like I love the science and I loved it, but sometimes you just need a practical tool of okay, I get how it works.
Right. I know what's supposed to happen, but how do we?
Yeah, like, cool. Neuron A talks to neuron B, and now I can't remember anyway. So I forgot what you just said. So I love that part about what you're doing here because it's taking the science and making it practical. It's how could we leverage the science, digest it all, and then give you an actual thing that can help you navigate your life.
Exactly right. And it's funny with your book on the wall behind you about writer's block. The only time I experienced writer's block was when I was writing the book the first time, and I started diving into the chapter about pain. And pain is such a complicated topic. There's just so much there, and we could go so far down that rabbit hole. And I kind of got lost in it. And what brought me back out of it was realizing exactly what you just said. Like the reason people listen to my podcast, buy my books, hire me as a coach, take my classes is because of that practical piece. Yeah, the science is all there, but how do we make that science relatable and actually usable in our real lives? So that was my experience with writer's block, was actually trying to write somebody else's book, right? Trying to write the science-y down the rabbit hole book. And when instead what I needed to write and what I did write was something that's a whole lot more practical and usable for people.
Yeah. And I remember, and I forget exactly which episode that you talk about this. You had a guest on and mentioned, and you had a little banter about the beauty of coaching for fibromyalgia being a nice complement to what's out there in terms of standard treatments or professionals that you have. And it comes back to this, just digesting the science. Let's just extract the good, juicy things that you can do right now to feel better, because that's all I care about. Oh, we just want to feel better right now. And I think that having an updated edition with something that's obviously such a big pain in the butt is the brain fog, that you can actually offer that really from the comfort of your own home. I just think it's brilliant. So congrats on that,
Thank you.
Because after a while we can list all the neurotransmitters we want, but okay, now what?
Exactly right. Not that long ago, this month, May, is Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. And every time we get to Awareness Day, like, no offense to the people who are out there advocating, we need that too. But the bottom line I always keep coming back to is we just want to feel better, right?
Yes.
We just want to feel better.
Yes.
And, as much as I'm glad that there are people who are out there going to Capitol Hill, talking to their senators and representatives and asking for funding for research, I'm glad they're doing that. But I also know that the reason I'm here on this planet is to help you feel better.
Yeah, it's powerful because that's the way we function and get to do the things we really love. Sometimes it's going outside. I mean, like I said, I'm in the anxiety world. Some people start to not leave their homes. They're unable to go outside because of those things. So it's beautiful. The title, I do want to get into that because I don't think I've ever directly asked you where Take Back Your Life comes from.
Oh, you'll love this.
Oh, good.
So when I was writing my first book, I am not a namer. I'm not a person that comes up with titles. All my titles are very like, this is a rock, this is a door. Very, very self-explanatory, very just not
I'm the same way.
It's just like, this is what it is. So when I was thinking about what the heck to title my book, I had no idea. And so what I actually did was I went out to my Facebook page. I've got about, 5,000 people or something who follow me on Facebook. And I said, okay, if I could wave a magic wand and give you one thing, anything, what would that be? And basically all the answers were some version of, I want my life back. And so Take Back Your Life. That's where the title came from.
Take Back Your Life. Yeah, because I mean, I've heard you talk about this and I read about this, that there's a progression. It's not like you're always in a fibro flare. So you do have an indication of all the things you're missing out once that happens, when that flare happens. And it almost is more torturous because you do know what a life without a flare and being on your couch feels like. Little disclosure, I think we were talking about this a little bit before, but my parents have fibromyalgia and my father's worst flare. I told him, Dad, by the way, I found out a word that describes what you just experienced as a fibro flare. I was so excited to tell him. But Dad, this is what's going on. And his sleep was disrupted because he couldn't get in the sheets. Like he physically couldn't cover himself. His skin was burning. But he knows what a life without that was like. It affected, his relationship with my mother, and it affected intimacy, if we go there, it affected a lot of things. So it's almost powerful. And I think this is one of the beautiful things you do here with your work and with your coaching is you give a language to what's happening. What was it like? And this is kind of a throwback to, I know you've talked about this, but what was it like when you were finding out your diagnoses? Because I think there's some people that now it's more in vogue, but it's still confusing because there's now so many resources. How do you know what to trust, right? So a little wink and a nudge to how you've discovered, you talk about building your healthcare team. And now with all the resources, how do you now sift through the non-accurate things?
Right. So when I was first diagnosed, I was one of those kids who was kind of born sick, it just a lot of stuff in my childhood. And so I was always kind of searching, as soon as I was old enough, really, too, searching for answers and why I felt the way that I felt and why I had the body that I had. Right. And so it took a long time for me to finally get a diagnosis. Once I did, of course, like most of us, I'm just following what my doctor's telling me to do. And it didn't really work very well. So I went about 2 years just kind of treading water, taking the medications, barely being able to get out of bed during the day, and had this moment where I realized that my future does not look very bright, and that's not the future I want to have. And that's when my doctor introduced me to a health coach. And that changed everything. I always tell people I'm not a fan of coaching because I am a coach. It's because a coach changed my life. And that coach became that sounding board that you're talking about, to be able to say, I read this article. What do you think? How could I implement this? Or, is this something I should check into? Also talking to my doctor, same doctor, right? Same resources, but just the questions I was able to ask and the way I was able to go about it. Now, of course, it's so much different. Doctors are diagnosing so much earlier. It took me years and years. That's much better now. And there are so many other things out there, but I still think having that trusted voice that you can bounce ideas off of. Come on, we've got brain fog, we've got pain, we've got fatigue. We can't be doing everything.
Right.
And we can't hardly evaluate everything either. So you've got to have that trusted person, that trusted source that you can say, hey, do you know any good podcasts? Hey, do you know any good books? Hey, what other things can I try? And that's one of the things that I love most about what my coaches and I are able to do for people, is just give you new ideas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is very powerful. Like you said, there's the brain fog. You can't think all of it. But, to someone who's listening, who has maybe a fibro flare or whatnot, and they are going to, say, a doctor, and they are maybe on a treatment plan of some sort, how do they know, right now would be a good time to find something else? What is going to be an indication that maybe what I'm trying isn't really working? How do they know? Because as far as they know, or as I've been on podcasts listening. I'm like, but I think my doctor's right. I trust them. How do they know there might be another solution?
That is such a great question. And that's really it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
most people listening, most fibromyalgia patients out there, like they're not doing nothing. They're not seeing nobody.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, so let's talk about that. So, I think the number one thing to think of is if you're just not where you want to be. If you're not you, if you're not able to do the things that you want to do, if you have more pain than you want to have, keep looking. There's more. There's more. The other thing is if you get to the point, so this is number two, get to the point where your doctor is running out of ideas. Sometimes we have doctors who really care. They're good human beings, right? And they're good doctors, but they can't know everything. I mean, all this fibro stuff, it is not taught in medical school, which means in order for your doctor really to know how to treat you, they have to have done their own studying and research and things like that. And not everybody has. So if you have one of those doctors who really cares, is really trying their best, but is running out of ideas, that's another opportunity. And then some other things that people might not realize, I can almost always tell how much somebody's doctor knows about fibro when I get on the phone with them. If you're taking opioid pain medication, not something like tramadol, but things like, if you're taking Vicodin, if you're taking oxycodone, if you're taking some of those heavier duty things, there's probably a better way. If you are only taking one or two medications. Maybe you are on Cymbalta, maybe you are on Lyrica, but you're only on like one or two. That's not enough. That won't do it. You need more. Or if you're on some of the older school things. So if you're taking things like gabapentin, amitriptyline, and you're not taking any of the newer things or haven't ever tried any of the newer things, that is also an indicator that your doctor might not know as much as they need to really get you where you want to be. And then the last thing is you got to dig deeper than fibromyalgia. I'm teaching a class right now, and it's been so interesting because I have several students in the class who've had fibro for years and have done pretty well in managing it, but just like still aren't quite where they want to be. And some of the first classes are on things like understanding your thyroid and treating adrenal fatigue and those underlying things. So often it just gets blamed on fibro fatigue. But if your adrenals aren't working properly, if your thyroid isn't working properly, then yeah, you're going to be tired. So we can't blame it all on fibro. We've got to dig deeper.
Yeah, there are definitely, I think they call them comorbidities.
Yes, that's the fancy word.
Yeah. It's the fancy one. I was just pulling them out. I don't know if you knew this. I was pre-med myself. So I was going to go into medical school, and then I just became a geneticist after that. And what you're saying to me rings a bell, because when we're prepping, so I never went to medical school, just full disclosure, but when we're prepping to get into that route, we're really understanding what curriculum is coming ahead for us. And you are learning the skills to understand anatomy and physiology, how meds work, so the pharmacokinetics of them. But the thing you said is so brilliant is that they're not going to teach you every single condition and comorbidities and how they interact. So when a doctor comes in, they're going to unfortunately just pick the first thing that is recommended to treat said condition. Same for fibro, and in my world, same for panic attacks. They're just going to throw you on some Xannies.
Right.
And so they're not going to necessarily know how to connect dots either. What would you say, someone ends up asking one of your fibro coaches or yourself, what is the likelihood that a doctor will listen if you said, hey, I talked to a coach, they gave me this article, will you read it and see if you can help me better? Because I think that's a very valuable thing, maybe having language to talk to the doctor.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So if you were a client and you were about to have that conversation with your doctor, we would actually talk about how to have the conversation because that is a huge piece of it, right? Like we want them to be receptive. And, if you go into the room saying, you're doing this all wrong, and my coach said, like, that's probably not the way.
Not going to work. Probably a little defensive.
Right.
Who's this coach you speak of?
Right. Exactly. And what's her medical degree? It is how we approach it, but also what we give them, right? Doctors, they're looking for the evidence, right? Evidence-based medicine, right? So what is the research? What do the studies say? Why is this going to help you? Why is this better than what we're doing? And, on your own, these might not be things that you know how to find. But as coaches, like absolutely, we can help you with that. I often give clients resources to take to their doctors. The main thing that we look for first, the main question I ask first is, do you believe your doctor is going to be receptive to this? Like when you go into your appointment, whatever you're talking about, whether it's, your cholesterol being a little high or whatever, like, do you have a collaborative relationship with your doctor where they're listening to your input and considering it? If so, we can totally do this because you already have that kind of a relationship. We just have to make sure we present it properly. If you have a doctor where you go in and you do not have that kind of collaborative relationship, it's all almost like a dictatorship where they just tell you, take two, call me in the morning kind of thing.
I've had that.
Then we may need to work on finding a new provider.
Right. Which is helpful to know too. You may not know the signs of what an unhealthy provider relationship is with you. It's super amazing. I think medications is a great litmus test. I love that you painted that because I was listening to you say those medications that are a little archaic for the treatment. And I have to say, Tammy, I think my father is on some of those. So like, it's alarming. I mean, I'm in that world, but in the anxiety side, right? So I could see how that is a litmus, but being able to just have the one-stop shop for fibromyalgia sounds absolutely beautiful. If there was something you could say to yourself when you were first on this journey that would have made it easier for you to get to where you are now. I know the third podcast, I believe it is, that you say that you really love fibro, right? What would you tell your early journey self in your fibromyalgia journey? Something that you know now that you wish you'd known then that would help her?
So I think there's really two things that I wish I had done sooner that would have gotten me here sooner. One of them is making friends with my own body. I spent way too long thinking of my body as something separate from myself and something that was the problem. And that's not true. My body wants to be well. And, if you have to have an enemy, the enemy is probably fibro, but I don't think it has to be the enemy either. But that's like way down the road before you. I'm not suggesting that, you try to adopt that attitude from the get-go because that's a hard one. So that's one of the big things was just like helping myself have that realization sooner that me and my body, we're on the same team. We're fighting the same thing. We want the same thing because that changes how I take care of myself. And then the second thing is having a coach sooner. I had no idea. I mean, honestly, that was one of my very first experiences working with a coach and how helpful it is to have somebody that comes alongside you. I mean, our doctors are great, but our medical system is not set up for weekly calls of an hour.
Right.
It's
exactly
just not going to happen. So having
true.
that coach that I can like talk to every week and say, hey, I set these goals, but it didn't work. And being able to like brainstorm and troubleshoot and figure out new ideas and support me trying to make hard changes and all of that kind of stuff. I would have gotten here so much faster if I had a coach sooner. So those are the two big things that I would change. And then the other thing that I would do is just like make sure that at the beginning, I knew that we were going to get there, right? Like, I am in remission now. I don't have fibro pain, and that was even a possibility, because our doctors are not telling us we're going to get you to a point where you're pain free again. No, they're telling us this is your new normal. Get used to it. Right.
Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. You just made me really think about people who experience panic attacks. The same thing is like, they just tell you, oh my God, take this med and you're going to live like this forever. So, oh my God, I didn't know that happened in your world too.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Oh my.
That's probably my biggest passion, is making sure people understand that you can get better. Now, how much better, of course, depends on a whole lot of stuff, right? And if you've got some of those comorbidities, if you've got degenerative disc disease, or, I mean, all kinds of other stuff, of course, that limits what we can accomplish. But everybody can feel better than they do right now, even me.
Yeah. That's wild. It's like the rhetoric that you would find around the healthcare community, pharmaceuticals. It almost suggests that you have to just get used to a life of it is, back to your brain fog. Just, I know that we've kind of talked about a lot of the hot points in the book, but if you had the brain fog, imagine trying to do all this on your own.
Right.
How do you fight a battle or talk to your doctor and you can't remember what your research was? It's such a beautiful compilation of the tools you need to feel better right now. And I think that's such a marvelous thing. And I love that you did a updated edition. I love, by the way, people will end up seeing your cover, but it's absolutely beautiful, y'all. It's gorgeous.
It is. It's so great. The most fun thing for me, I mean, it was really cool for me to finally be able to add in the chapter I knew was always missing from day one. But the even more fun thing for me was being able to update my story. It blew my mind how much better I had gotten in the last 7 years. So, how many times in the book I would talk about almost no flares, or how I manage when I do have a flare up, or almost no pain. And all of that has changed, right? The last time I had any fibro pain was New Year's Eve, 2018.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's been a while. And to be able to, I don't know, I think so often in our own journeys, we don't see the progress that we're making because we're in it. Right. And so we're going through the day to day, and we're just like trying to get through the day, and we don't see it. Feels same old, right? But to be able to look back after 7 years and see all of the changes it was worth it to update the book, just for my own acknowledgement of what I've accomplished and how far I've come. And I hope that also is an encouragement to anybody reading that. From that side of things, thinking into the future, 7 years seems like forever. Right. But I can tell you from this side, it wasn't that long.
Right. I can imagine. I think it's a beautiful term. I actually get goosebumps every time you say it, is remission of fibromyalgia pain. You almost don't think of that's a possibility. I will be sharing this episode with my father. You're like, Dad, did you know that you don't have to be in pain forever? But yeah, I just think it's absolutely a beautiful updated compilation of what's possible with the fibro journey. So, well, I feel super honored, Tammy, to be able to interview you about your second book. I know that you mentioned where people can grab it, but could they start grabbing it as soon as they listen to this?
Yes, I will make sure that as soon as this episode comes out, that link I gave, takebackyourlifebook.com, that will actually have the second edition. If any of you have downloaded my book before, yes, it's the same URL. But I will update the file. And so you can go out there and download it again and get the new version and check out that chapter on brain fog and all the updates.
and your updated language about your story about being in remission, which is beautiful. So
Yes.
congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. There's some fun updates that I talk about in the front of the book too that might be kind of fun to mention. One of them is, when I first wrote that book, it was just me doing this work. There was nobody else doing this particular combination style of coaching that I do. And since then, I have trained people all over the world. And you and I were talking before we started recording. The term certified fibromyalgia coach is a registered trademark of mine. And so that means if you see somebody calling themselves a certified fibromyalgia coach, that means they were trained personally by me to do this kind of work.
It's amazing. Wow.
Yes, that's a big deal because, when I wrote that first book, like there was just me. There was no trademark or anything like that because it was just me.
Sounds like you created the exact thing you wanted, you wish you had.
Gosh, yes, 100%, 100%. Yep. And then the other fun thing that is going to be coming, I mentioned it a few times on the podcast, but there is a documentary on fibromyalgia called Invisible that will be out sometime this year. We're currently shopping it around to film festivals, but I'll definitely be sharing on here when we know where people can see it. But it's such a beautiful story of the whole gamut of fibromyalgia, everything from those people who are extremely disabled, unable to work because of fibromyalgia, all the way to people like me who are in remission. There's lots of experts. It's a really fantastic documentary, and I cannot wait to share that. And that is something that's been in the works over the last 7 years as well.
Wow. And what a powerful name, by the way, Invisible. It really is a testimony to how unspoken or the lack of language around this whole entire condition is. So, wow.
Right. It's that whole, invisible illness, right? You don't look sick.
You don't look sick. When you describe the burning or the pain, it's like, but wait, there's nothing actual burning on your skin.
Right. So, not even a red mark.
Right? There's not a red mark. What do you mean you feel like your skin's crawling off and burning?
Right. And we have those days where we can function, right? We have our good days, right?
Like instantly sometimes.
Right, exactly. And so sometimes when we are like, the only time we're out of our house, the only time anybody is seeing us is on those good days. They're not seeing the days that we go from bed to couch and wear the same pajamas for a week. Like people aren't seeing that. So our illnesses are very invisible and we kind of become invisible.
I know. It's such a powerful title. And I'll share this little bit. I was a little shy to say this at the beginning. I talked about my dad a little, but it wasn't until I listened to your podcast and read your books that I was realizing these hot burning patches on my skin were that. So I didn't even have language for what was going on. So that's amazing. It's just these names, Invisible, Take Back Your Life, really paint a powerful picture of what a life without fibro or fibro in remission could be like. So congratulations on all the book, all your new endeavors, the registered trademark, and the film. So an honor to talk to you about your upcoming journey.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been so much fun to have you here. Just for those listening, I thought a long time about how I could talk about my new book in a way that would be fun for me and fun for you. Right? Like I could sit here and just sort of tell you about it. But thank you so much for being willing to do this and all the good questions you asked that we got to talk about fun stuff that we wouldn't have talked about otherwise. So
yeah, sometimes having a third party kind of helps you bounce additional things, unpack things a little bit differently or things you wouldn't have thought of. So it's my honor, of course.
All right. So everybody make sure you are back here for our next episode because we're going to flip the tables and talk about the Panic Freedom Academy and all the fun work that you're doing to help people with panic attacks.
Yep. I look forward to seeing you, hearing you, what? Being with you all next time.
wraps up my interview with Ramses. I hope you really enjoyed that conversation and that you'll be back for next episode. We're going to flip the tables back around the way they usually are, and I will be interviewing him about his work. Ramses works with people who are suffering from panic attacks and anxiety. And so many of you, I know, are dealing with anxiety with your fibromyalgia, either because of your fibromyalgia or maybe you already had the anxiety. But this will be a great episode for you. So make sure you come back for episode 84. And of course, I have this week's listener shout out for you. This was a comment made on our Facebook page. This is from Louise Wells. She says, "I'm listening from Australia. What an awesome episode. Thanks for all the insight." She was talking about the episode that I did with Sarah Kleiner, Befriend Your Nervous System. Of course, we'll have a link to that episode in today's show notes. That's episode 81. You can go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/83 for today's episode to get all of the links mentioned today, or /81 to get that episode with Sarah Kleiner on befriending your nervous system. Now, I mentioned several times in my interview and at the beginning of this episode that I was going to share a link where you could get a copy of the second edition of Take Back Your Life for free early. You can do that by going to takebackyourlifebook.com, all run together. And if you go out there, sign up, you will actually get another copy. So even if you've done this before, do it again, and that will give you the updated version. You can also grab that on the podcast website under the books menu. You'll see Take Back Your Life there. Now, that part won't be updated like the picture that you see there. It'll look like the old one until the new one comes out. So it'll be our little secret. But if you do go out there and request that download, you will get the new version. I'll make sure that is all updated to coincide with this episode's release. I hope that you enjoy the new book, the new chapter on brain fog, all the updates that I've made, and I would love to hear from you what you think. See you next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stacklehouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.